Ich schwöre bei Gott,
the Almighty and Omniscient,
dem Allmächtigen und Allwissenden,
that I will speak the pure truth.
dass ich die reine Wahrheit sage, dass ich nichts verschweigen und nichts hinzusetzen will.
Before his death in 1957, German Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus spoke a few final words that stunned historians and shook the world. His last confession was not loud or emotional, but it carried a meaning so powerful that it still sparks debate today. To understand why his final words matter, we must look at who he was and how one man's obedience, loyalty, and silence led to one of the darkest turning points in World War II. Paulus's name is forever tied to the Battle of Stalingrad, one of the most brutal and tragic confrontations in modern history. It was a battle that cost the lives of over 1 million people and changed the course of the war. But behind those numbers was a man who started as an ordinary soldier, who lived a life guided by rules, duty, and discipline. He never saw himself as a hero or a villain, just a man following orders. Yet at the end of his life, that same sense of obedience became the reason for his guilt and regret. When he finally spoke before dying, his confession showed the world how dangerous blind loyalty can be, even in the name of honor and country. Friedrich Paulus was born on September 23, 1890, in a small town called Breitenau in Germany. His father was a schoolteacher, and his mother came from a simple farming family. There was nothing in his childhood that hinted at a future filled with war and fame. He was a quiet, serious boy who preferred studying and following rules rather than causing trouble. Unlike other children who dreamed of glory or adventure, Paulus grew up with a love for order, discipline, and structure. His manners were polite, and his behavior calm. Those who knew him described him as reserved and cautious, someone who always thought before acting. His early dream was to join the German Navy, fascinated by ships and life at sea. But his poor health and lack of family influence stopped him from being accepted. That rejection quietly changed the direction of his life. Instead of the Navy, he turned to the army, where he found a place that valued precision, loyalty, and control, the very qualities that defined him. At the age of 19, in 1910, Friedrich Paulus joined the German army as an officer cadet. He was assigned to the 111th Infantry Regiment. Unlike some soldiers who were bold and loud, Paulus was a man who preferred to plan, observe, and analyze. His superiors quickly noticed his attention to small details. He was not a natural fighter or a passionate leader, but he was reliable, calm, and efficient, the kind of officer who made sure every plan worked smoothly. When World War I broke out in 1914, Paulus did not fight in the front lines as much as he worked behind them, helping with logistics and planning. These jobs may not have been glamorous, but they were crucial. His ability to organize men, supplies, and movement earned him respect from higher officers. After the war, Germany was broken and humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles, which reduced its army to only 100,000 men. Many soldiers lost their positions, but Paulus was one of the few who stayed. His calm and loyal nature helped him survive the difficult years of the Weimar Republic. When Germany was politically unstable, during that time, he married Alina Rosetia Salescu, a noblewoman from Romania. Their marriage gave him social standing and emotional strength throughout his career. Despite his quiet personality, Paulus's life was slowly being shaped by the events of a world that was about to change again. By the early 1930s, Adolf Hitler had risen to power and started rebuilding Germany's military strength, ignoring the rules of the Versailles Treaty. The army began expanding again, and officers like Paulus, who had remained loyal during the quiet years, were promoted. Paulus stayed away from politics, preferring to serve as a professional soldier. He was not outspoken or ambitious like other generals such as Erwin Rommel or Heinz Guderian, but he was known for his precision and discipline. These traits made him valuable to the growing Wehrmacht, Hitler's powerful new army. His focus on planning and structure earned him senior staff positions where he worked on organizing major operations. He was the kind of man superiors trusted because he never questioned orders. As war clouds gathered over Europe, that same loyalty and caution would soon bring him face to face with both success and disaster. When World War II began in 1939, Paulus was not yet famous. He was still a planner, a man behind the scenes. But history had bigger plans for him. The wars, chaos, and the speed of the German army's victories pushed him upward, and soon he would be handed one of the most important commands of the entire war, a command that would define his life and his legacy. In the early years of World War II, the German army achieved stunning victories across Europe. Paulus played an important role in the planning and coordination of several campaigns, including the invasion of France in 1940. His talent for logistics made him invaluable to his superiors, but his greatest test came in 1942, when Hitler gave him command of the Sixth Army, one of the largest and most powerful forces in the German military. The mission was to capture Stalingrad, a major Soviet city on the Volga River that bore the name of Joseph Stalin himself. The battle for Stalingrad was not just military. It was symbolic. Hitler believed that taking the city would destroy Soviet morale. Paulus, loyal and obedient as always, accepted the mission without question. At first, everything went as planned. His army advanced rapidly, pushing deeper into Soviet territory. But the further they went, the more difficult it became to maintain supplies. The Soviet forces fought fiercely, refusing to surrender even an inch of ground. The battle soon turned into a nightmare of street fighting, where every building, every basement, and even every sewer became a battleground. As winter approached, food and fuel began to run out, and Paulus's men started to suffer. By November 1942, the German situation in Stalingrad had become desperate. The Soviets launched a massive counterattack called Operation Uranus, surrounding Paulus's entire army. More than 250,000 German soldiers were trapped inside the ruins of the city, cut off from supplies and reinforcements. Paulus still had a small chance to escape early on, but Hitler gave a strict order: hold Stalingrad at all costs. Hitler promised that supplies would be delivered by air, but the Luftwaffe could not possibly carry enough food, fuel, or ammunition for such a large army. The soldiers began to starve, freeze, and lose hope. Many of Paulus's officers begged him to disobey Hitler's order and attempt to break out, but Paulus refused. His entire life had been built on obedience, and he could not bring himself to go against a direct command from his leader. For months, the Sixth Army suffered unimaginable pain. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Soldiers wrapped themselves in rags. They burned furniture to stay warm. Hunger and disease spread. Paulus saw his men dying every day. Yet he remained loyal to the chain of command that demanded they stay and fight a hopeless battle. It was a moment that tested not just his leadership, but his humanity. By January 1943, the Sixth Army was finished. Hitler promoted Paulus to the rank of Field Marshal, the highest position in the German military, expecting him to commit suicide rather than surrender. No German Field Marshal had ever been captured alive before, but Paulus refused to take his own life. When Soviet troops entered his command post on January 31, 1943, he surrendered. This moment shocked Germany and marked the beginning of the end for Hitler's empire. Stalingrad became a symbol of both tragedy and turning tide. A graveyard of soldiers and the point where the unstoppable German army finally began to fall apart. In captivity, Paulus's views started to change. While imprisoned in the Soviet Union, he joined the National Committee for a Free Germany, a group of captured officers who spoke against Hitler and the Nazi regime. He publicly called for German troops to stop fighting, declaring that continued loyalty to Hitler would only destroy the nation further. His transformation from a loyal commander to a critic of Hitler was seen by many as a form of redemption, but for others, especially in the West, it was an act of betrayal. After World War II ended, Paulus was not allowed to return to West Germany. He lived in East Germany, where the communist government celebrated him as a symbol of change, a man who had broken away from Nazism. He gave interviews and attended events, but deep down, he was a shadow of his former self. Years in captivity, stress, and regret had left him weak and tired. By the mid-1950s, his health had declined badly. In 1957, he was admitted to a hospital in Dresden, suffering from respiratory illness. Those who saw him in his final days described him as thin, pale, and calm. He often reflected on his past and the terrible loss of life at Stalingrad. He knew that his decisions, especially his refusal to defy Hitler, had cost the lives of hundreds of thousands of men. As death approached, the burden of his conscience grew heavier. And it was during those last moments that he made the confession that would make history remember him, not just as a general, but as a man who finally saw the truth too late. As Paulus lay on his hospital bed in February 1957, he spoke softly to a nurse and a few close visitors. His last words revealed the weight he had carried for years. He said, "I had no intention of shooting myself for that Bohemian corporal." After surrendering at Stalingrad, Friedrich Paulus became a man crushed by both physical and emotional exhaustion. He had commanded one of the most powerful armies in Europe. Yet now he was a prisoner, surrounded by Soviet soldiers who had fought with unimaginable courage and sacrifice. His body was weak from hunger and cold. But what hurt more was the realization that his army had been destroyed under his command. Thousands of his men lay frozen in the ruins of Stalingrad, and hundreds of thousands more were taken prisoner. Many would never return home. In those first weeks of captivity, Paulus refused to speak much. He spent long hours alone, staring out at the snow-covered camps. The once proud field marshal was now a broken figure, haunted by guilt and disbelief. Reports from Soviet officers who guarded him said that Paulus seemed lost in thought, often murmuring about duty and orders. For a man who had lived his life by military discipline, the defeat at Stalingrad was not just a military failure, it was a spiritual collapse. He had followed orders exactly as he was taught to, yet those same orders had led to catastrophe. That contradiction would stay with him until his last breath. In the months after his surrender, the Soviet government saw an opportunity in Paulus. They knew that his cooperation could become a powerful propaganda tool against Hitler. At first, Paulus refused to participate. He saw himself still as a soldier, bound by honor and loyalty to Germany, even if he no longer trusted Hitler. But as the war dragged on and the reports of Nazi atrocities, concentration camps, mass executions and burning villages became undeniable, something inside him began to change. He started to question everything he had believed in. He wondered whether his silence and obedience had made him part of the evil he once thought he was fighting against. Slowly, he began to talk with his Soviet captors, especially with German communists who were also prisoners of war. These men argued that true patriotism meant saving Germany from Hitler's madness. Paulus, tired and reflective, began to agree. In 1944, he joined the National Committee for a Free Germany, a movement made up of German officers who called on their comrades to stop fighting for Hitler. He even recorded radio messages urging German soldiers to surrender and save their lives. It was a shocking transformation from Hitler's loyal general to his outspoken critic. Some saw it as betrayal, but others saw it as awakening. After Germany's defeat in 1945, Paulus remained in the Soviet Union. He was kept under comfortable, though limited, conditions in a house near Moscow. Unlike other prisoners, he had a private room, books, and food. But comfort could not replace freedom. He was alone, separated from his wife Alina, who was living in West Germany. He wrote her letters that revealed his inner torment. In one, he confessed, "Every night, I see Stalingrad in my dreams. I see my men calling to me, asking why I did nothing." His guilt never faded. Even though he now spoke against Hitler and Nazism, he could not forgive himself for the thousands who had died under his command. The Soviets used him in war crimes trials, where he testified against high-ranking Nazi leaders at Nuremberg. His appearance at the trials caused global attention. The world watched the once famous German Field Marshal speak against his former comrades. Many in Germany called him a traitor. But some historians later saw this as an act of courage, the decision of a man who finally chose truth over loyalty. Still, Paulus never returned to his old confident self. The war had taken everything from him, his reputation, his soldiers, his peace of mind. In 1953, 10 years after his capture, Friedrich Paulus was finally allowed to leave the Soviet Union, but he was not permitted to go to West Germany, where his wife and many of his former colleagues lived. Instead, the Soviet authorities sent him to East Germany, which was under communist control. There, he lived in a small house in the city of Dresden.